therefore of the world. If any of you have been there, and I know many of you have, it is truly, truly a wonderful place to go and spend some time. So there's Jen and I there just a couple of days ago. And there's Diane and I there. And this is very important to Diane too in her teaching, because she too teaches Ruskin at her university. And this Kirby Lonsdale and this visit to it meant a great deal to both of us. There's a wonderful painting of this. We can't do it because we won't have sound, so we won't do that. And the painting is Turner's, of course, and it's called Kirby Lonsdale Churchyard. And Ruskin features it in this lecture that I think so much of, that I truly love, and I think is one of his best in a plethora of bests. It's an argument about the importance of reading great literature. And he gave it in Rusholme Town Hall in Manchester, which we tried to find, but apparently it too is obliterated. We spent half a day trying to find that. But it doesn't matter. The lecture still survives. And the importance of reading the words, works, thoughts of those great people who gave their lives to write down the things that they thought we really needed to know, which they had learned. So Ruskin is always in favor of reading. But he's always in favor of reading great things, as opposed to mediocre or lesser things, because it's the thoughts and the minds and the thinking of the others that cultivate the head and soften the heart and make us see the complexity of the world, because those people were capable of doing it. That's where the metaphor comes in. Those are the king's treasuries, the treasuries written by the true kings of the earth, which I'll get to in a moment later, so that those things properly read, properly attended to, properly thought about, get us to that secret that the little prince was talking about. Get us to the ability to enjoy the days that Emily Gibbs saw, that we don't see so very well when we're in them. So Ruskin comes to the end of his lecture of King's Treasuries. And he says, because we don't do this, again, it's so remarkable to think that he was talking to people who were like him, as highly educated as he was. He was talking to all the privileged people of England. Those are the kind of people who went to his lectures. And then he castigates them, excoriates them for taking advantage of everybody and not doing their God-given duty to the rest of the world. So he comes to a point just before the end of King's Treasures where he speaks of what I like to call the despisings. He says, because you have not done this, because you have not taken on your responsibility as the elites of the earth. Who else would do this? If not you, who? Because you have not done this, you despise literature. You despise art. You despise nature. You despise science. And you despise the most important thing of all, human compassion. You don't care about other people's suffering. So what he did in all the volumes that are sensitive to this, in the library edition certainly is one, is when he comes to the bit about, I told you before about the long passage about the man who was starving to death in London that nobody paid any attention to and so on. He printed it in red so that they wouldn't miss the point. Yeah? And so this whole passage about this fellow is in red. Ruskin is doing everything he can. With every breath that he has in him, he believes in the St. George as his own creed, to get people to hear what he's trying to say about these things. And so with this in the background, at the end of King's Treasuries, he says this. There is a curious type of us, he means the painting, given in one of the lovely neglected works of the last of our great painters. It is a drawing of Kirby Lonsdale Churchyard, and of its brook and valley and hills, and folded morning sky beyond, and unmistakable alike of these and of the dead who have left these for other valleys and for other skies. There is a group of schoolboys, and they have piled their little books upon a grave to strike them off with stones. And so too we play, with the words of the dead that would teach us, and strike them far from us with our bitter, reckless will, little thinking that those leaves which the wind scatters have been piled not only upon a gravestone, but upon the seal of an enchanted vault. Nay, the gate of a great city of sleeping kings who would awake for us and walk with us if we knew how to call them by their names. How often, even if we lift the marble entrance gate, do we but wander among those old kings in their repose, and finger the robes they lie in, and stir the crowns on their foreheads, and still they are silent to us, and seem but a dusty imagery, because we know not the incantation of the heart which would wake them. Which, if they heard, they would start up and meet us in their power of long ago, narrowly to look upon us and consider us, as the fallen kings of Hades met with the newly fallen, saying, Art thou also become as weak as we? Art thou also become one of us? And so would these kings, with their undimmed, unshaken diadems, meet us, saying, Art thou also become pure and mighty of heart, as we? Art thou also become one of us? Mighty of heart, mighty of mind, magnanimous. That's the meaning of that word. To be this is indeed to be great in life. To become this increasingly is indeed to advance in life itself, and not the trappings of it. He only is advancing in life whose heart is getting softer, whose blood warmer, whose brain quicker, whose spirit is entering into living peace. And the men who have this life in them are the true lords or kings of the earth, they and they only. So that's a pretty powerful piece of writing to talk to his audience about. All his life, Ruskin gave all his might to helping people see what he saw. The law of sacrifice. You have to give more, even when you don't want to. Ruskin, you can make the argument that in many ways, Ruskin's own personal life is this enormous tragedy, which in some ways it is. Because he gave so much, because he cared so much, he didn't attend to himself, he attended to others. St. George, the books, the lectures, the teaching, all of these things, the collecting of art, giving it away, doing all of these things, he always did for others, all his life, to the point of utter exhaustion, to the point of collapse often. And that is worthy of our attention, that kind of life is a model. So he really illustrates for me, I'm coming to the end here. He really illustrates for me this whole idea of how we appropriate the world properly. And as some of you know, what have we got? 10 minutes?
5, 7.
7?
7, yeah. I know you're 7.
Where's the
7.
hook? Okay. So I want to tell you about this anyway, because to me it's very important. It kind of brings it all together for me. In one of his letters in Force Clavigera, the 5th letter, it's called The White Thorn Blossom. Ruskin has a passage which many of you know, I think, very highly. And I thought long and hard about it. And it tells the story of a woman friend of his who had been to the Victoria and Albert Museum to hear a lecture on botany. And she returns, and she's telling him about it over tea, and she talks about what the botanist had to say, and this is what she says to Ruskin in his response, which I think is, again, one of the greatest passages in Ruskin. And then my friend told me that she had no idea before the lectures that she had gone to that petals were leaves. On hearing which, I thought to myself that it would be not of any great harm to her if she had remained under her old impression that petals were petals. But I said, that was very pretty, and what more did you hear? And so my friend told me that the lecturer had said that the object of his lectures would be entirely accomplished if he could convince his hearers that there was no such thing as a flower. Now, in that sentence, you have the most perfect and admirable summary given you of the general temper and purposes of modern science. It gives lectures on botany, of which the object is to show that there is no such thing as a flower. On humanity, to show that there is no such thing as a man. On theology, to show that there is no such thing as a God. No such thing as a man, only a mechanism. No such thing as a God, but only a series of forces. The two faiths are essentially one. And if you feel yourself only to be a machine, constructed to be a regulator of minor machinery, you will put your statue of such science on your Holborn viaduct and necessarily recognize only major machinery as regulating you. I must explain the real meaning to you, however, of that saying of the botanical lecturer, because there's a wide bearing. Yes, thank you very much.
It's telling me something.
It's telling me about nature. Hey, serious misinterpretation. A mechanical verb. Okay, so here's how he responds. I must explain the real meaning to you, however, of that saying of the botanical lecture, for it has a wide bearing. Some 50 years ago, the poet Goethe discovered that all the parts of plants had a kind of common nature and would change into each other. Now, this is a true discovery, and a notable one. And you will find that, in fact, all plants are composed of essentially two parts, the leaf and the root. The one loving the light and the other the darkness. The one liking to be clean, the other to be dirty. The one liking to grow for the most part up, the other for the most part down, and each having faculties and purposes of its own. But the pure one, which loves the light, has above all things the purpose of being married to another leaf, and having child leaves, and children's children of leaves, to make the earth fair forever. And when the leaves marry, they put on wedding robes, and are more glorious than Solomon in all of his glory, and they have feasts of honey, and we call them flowers. In a certain sense, therefore, you see the lecturer was quite right. There are no such things as flowers. There are only gladdened leaves. But in the deepest sense, the botanical lecturer was to the extremity of wrongness wrong. For leaf and root and fruit exist all of them that there only may be flowers. He disregarded the life and the passion of the creature which were its essence. Had he looked for these, he would have recognized that in the thought of nature herself, there is in a plant nothing else but its flowers. Now, in exactly the sense that modern science declares there is no such thing as a flower, it is declared there is no such thing as a man, only a transitional form of Ascidians and apes. It may or may not be true. It is not of the smallest consequence whether it be or not. The real fact, and this is the part that I think is so critical, rightly seen with human eyes, there is nothing else but man. That all animals and beings made beside him are only made that they may change into him, and that the world only truly exists in the presence of man. Acts only in the presence of man. The essence of life is in his eyes, the center of force in his soul, and the pertinence of all action in his deeds. And all true science is savoir-vivre, knowledge of life. And all your modern science is the contrary of that. It is savoir-mourir, the knowledge of death. It's a wonderful passage, and